I'm turning on the recording and we'll get started. Thank you.
Okay.
And everyone else, please mute yourself or I'll check that everyone's muted. Okay.
Good. So thank you very much, Rabbi Julie, for the opportunity to be here. And I also want to thank Lenora for her logistical support. And I want to thank you for being here, because if you didn't show up, I'd actually have no reason to be here. And I would say this is a historic moment in Jewish history, in the sense that there are more people on small little squares on their computer learning Torah all across the country, and we can be sure all around the world, than ever before in the history of the Jewish people. So this is a historic moment. And just to reiterate and add a little bit more to what you said about these tikkunim, so the Kabbalists were under the influence of the Ottoman Turks. The Kabbalists, and some of you have been to Tzfat, Safed, so it took place in Safed. It was around the 1540, 1550, somewhere around there. And coffee began to get imported it was really it was Turkish coffee. They didn't yet have Starbucks, unfortunately, but they drank Turkish coffee. And so they actually created at least three different all-night vigils. There's a tikkun Shmini Atzeret that you do in the middle of Sukkot. There's a tikkun that you do on the seventh night of Pesach, and there's a tikkun Leil Shavuot. So that, as Rabbi Julie said, our ancestors were seduced by the golden calf. So we want to stay awake and not fall into the somnambulance that leads to worshiping the golden calf. So in a little while, I'm going to do some screen sharing, and tonight we're going to learn about Ruth. So we're a small enough group, and I want to be able to do some dialogue with you. So keep yourself muted. But if I ask you a question and you want to answer it, it's probably better to just pipe in. So why do we read the Book of Ruth tonight? Like, what do you know about the Book of Ruth? Anyone? I mean, I'm willing to answer that very, very easily. I just want to, I want to know if you know, like, we know Shavuot is about the giving of the commandments at Sinai, but where does Ruth fit in? Good. So if you don't have an answer to that question.
Okay, I'll bite. What I know about the Book of Ruth is what I saw in Israel 40 some odd years ago on a US-wide tour, where there was a musical production of the Book of Ruth. And what I got out of it basically was Ruth became part of the Jewish people, and she sang a song, "Your People Are Mine," and that was pretty much it. And that was what USY taught me about the Book of Ruth.
Good. So how does it link to Shavuot? Because in the same way that Ruth bought in and said, "Your people are my people," when the Israelites received the commandment at Sinai, they say, "I will be your people, you will be my God." There's another element to it. So let's just go to a couple. I'm going to go here and there, and there's 5 Megillot. Okay. We read at Esther, at Purim we read Esther, at Pesach we read the Song of Songs, at Sukkot we read Ecclesiastes. We read Ecclesiastes because that's when we talk about a time to be born, time to die, and the vegetation is dying. Lamentations, or Echa, is Tisha B'Av. We read about the destruction of the temple. On Shavuot takes place at the time of the barley harvest. And the story of Ruth is at the time of the barley harvest. Rabbi Julie, how are we doing? Is the screen share okay?
Yeah, it looks great. And anyone that wants to see more of you and less of the screen, they can go to their viewing options, and they can pick different modes. So you can play with that. But if you want to see this audio, these visuals, it's looking great.
I'll go back and forth.
Right.
Okay, so let's do this together. Let's say a bracha for Torah study. I want to ask you to unmute yourself, because I want to bring the cacophony of sounds of all of these people thirsty for Torah into the space. So we're going to be learning Torah. We're not saying the bracha for reading the Megillah, but we're going to say the Torah for the bracha for studying Torah. join me together. Say amen if you don't know it. Baruch atah
Adonai,
Eloheinu
melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav, tzivanu l'aseh.
Love the cacophony. Says, Holy One of blessing, you give us this opportunity to soak in the words of Torah, as my friend and colleague Arthur Waskow translates it. Okay, so we're jumping in. The book of Judges begins, it says, at the time when the judges judged. That's the opening line. At the time when the judges judged. Okay, so it's not when the Supreme Court meets. Okay, that's the first thing. Basically, the time when the judges judged was soon after the Israelites got into the land. Remember, hang on, I'm supposed to do this now. Remember when Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho and the walls came tumbling down? You remember that? The Israelites, they got out of Egypt, they took over the land. They weren't yet a nation. They were a confederacy. There were 13 tribes. Oh no, wait, that's American history. Yeah, there were 12 tribes, and each of the tribe had a judge, and the judges judged. That's how it was. So that's the opening line. At the time when the judges judged, that's about, for those of you who want a historical frame, that's about 1100, 1200 BCE, before the Common Era. But the book itself was written. For those of you who read history, it's post-exilic. It's like 4th, 5th century. Okay, so that's that little vignette of history that I want to say. The other thing I want to share with you is how I want to do this reading tonight. Okay, so that I actually you'll forgive me because I'm not technologically perfect. I'm technologically imperfect. I want to talk about a mythic approach, okay? You know, we used to say myth was like, myth is a baba maisa. You know, myth is like you made that up. It's a myth. Ever since Joseph Campbell used to do those late night talks on PBS, remember that? Not that long ago, he was doing that. Joseph Campbell said, a myth is a story that has a deeper meaning than the story. A myth can be an allegory of the process of spiritual development, okay? Ruth is unconnected with any other narrative in biblical history. It's pretty much its own, other than a reference at the very end to King David. It doesn't fit into the Genesis cycle. It doesn't quite fit into the Exodus cycle. It's its own story. And even the rabbis knew that it was an allegory. So tonight we're going to look at Ruth as an allegory of the process of spiritual development, and in particular, because of where we are in our time in history, at the process of dealing with loss and transition and dislocation. Can anybody relate to loss, transition, and dislocation? You don't have to answer, but you can shake your heads. I have a feeling that in this time of pandemic, we can relate to it. So Ruth is the perfect medicine, the perfect allegory, the perfect myth for us to ask the question, what can we see in our own lives mirrored back to us in the story of Ruth? So that's basically where I'm going tonight. Okay, before we go into the first one, anybody want to comment so far? You know, I don't want to do this all one-way delivery. I see you there. I see you're thinking, you know, you're scratching your head a little bit. I can see you when you do that. Anyone comments, questions before we're going to jump into the text. We did the Bracha Torah study, and I'm going to do a time check. We're going to land here, you know, a little less than an hour because we don't want the ice cream to melt. Good. I want to welcome my friend Kenta Naomi Hirsch. She's probably driving and listening on her phone, but I'm saying hello to her. Okay, so back to, which means that you can't see my slides, Naomi. Okay, so here's where the book begins. In the days when the judges judged, there was a famine in the land. That's the way the story begins. It already begins in a time of crisis. There's a famine in the land. And to add a little commentary on Ruth 1:1. I'm going to read this piece over here from Amos. Amos writes, "Behold, the days are coming, says Adonai, that I will send a famine in the land, not a famine for bread, not a thirst for water, but to hear the words of God." This is how it begins. There's a famine to hear. It's not, you look around America and okay, you can't go and do as much shopping as you used to. So unless you probably have mostly Amazon.com on your credit card, or wherever else you're ordering from. But America has been historically a land of such abundance, and what they're talking about metaphorically, yes, in the land where Ruth and her daughters-in-law and her sons were going to meet, but read in a second, where they are, there's no food. But where we are in our life, it's a time of spiritual thirst. It's a time of yearning. What do we need to get through this time of dislocation, of famine, this time where, in some sense, we're hungry to hear the words of God, because that's why you signed on tonight, to be able to hear the words of God. So I'm going to make you do. I'm not giving you homework to take home, but I'm giving you reflection work as we go along. In what ways are you hungry spiritually? And have you been feeding or starving your soul? Okay, I'm not talking about the problem of social distancing to keep 6 feet from the fridge. Okay, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about how are you really nourishing your soul? I had to confess today that I live too close to the fridge, but what are the stirrings of your soul, and where are you on the spiritual journey at this time? So before we even go into the book, I want the book to be inside of you, and I want you to think about this kind of question. If we had 2 hours and a longer time, we could open up the mic and continue our dialogue with this. But just make some notes if you're writing. Do some reflection. We need, and if somebody wants to comment, Gazinter, hey, Julie, please dialogue with me anytime you want to add something.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying, anyone that wants to jump in, everyone in our congregation knows that we're very open to give and take. So if there's something that really moves you that you want to just jump in, then unmute yourself and speak up. But there'll be other time more formal, but at any time. Okay. Yeah,
I'm back.
Well, I have a thought about this actually, because a lot of things that I thought were very metaphorical in the Bible suddenly became so not metaphorical this year, like the plague in Egypt, the plague during. So some of the things, they can be real physical problems and be spiritual. They can be on different levels. That's right.
Yeah. It's both true. It's true in real time, and it's true allegorically and mythically. Someone else?
Yes. What I miss is the ability to attend services and to react and interact with others.
Right. So it is in a lot of ways it is a time of hunger. In a lot of ways it is a time of hunger, and there's a challenge. We're going to see from Ruth and Naomi. It's a challenge to deal with life when stuff happens. Okay. So let's make sure we keep reading the book. Okay, you'll forgive me. It's a 3 or 4 part process to go back to where we. Okay, so Julie, will you be my reader at least for this one, top right?
Yes. And a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name was Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Machlon and Kilion. They were Ephratites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there.
Okay, let me just say this, and I want to read the next part. But in last year, we would have talked this about, they're refugees in another way too. They got a green card to go live in Moab.
Yes. And their names of the sons are sort of symbolic, because they're it's like sickness and kind of destruction. They have, we'll see that, I'm sure you'll point out different names here are symbolic. Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they lived there about 10 years, both Machlon and Kilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband.
You know what? We're only on verse 5. We're only on verse 5, and we have a bereavement story. Okay? Her husband died, and her 2 children died, and she's dislocated in time because she's not in her own culture with her own people. And in some sense, Lehevdel, thank God, we're dealing with loss. Look, some people are dealing with death. I mean, we hit 100,000 deaths from COVID-19 this week. So I see some names, I see some faces. I have no idea how close to home this, but there's a lot of families that have that have been through that. They lost a husband and 2 children. That's not unheard of in the last in the last 3 months. So, right. And it may well be that some of you have lost parents. And so you can relate to this. But this is also the fertile ground for real deep spiritual work. I want to go back to my screen share for a second. Share, you'll forgive me. It takes 3 clicks. Right? Okay. Actually, let's go. I'm going to jump ahead and ask it like this. What have been the places of loss in your own life? In what way did life not give you what you want? Like there's loss by death, but we're all going through a time of loss. You can't go to visit with your children, your grandchildren. Somebody was saying, their deep loss was they can't go to Starbucks. Starbucks was like where they got their menuchat nefesh, their spiritual sustenance. They would go for a loan. They had a crazy household, and they would go sit and they would get an hour in Starbucks. So in some sense, we're all going through a time of loss. Okay, so how does she deal with the trauma? Julie, you want to read the next one, please?
When she heard in Moab that the Lord had, or as we like to say at PCS, Adonai, had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she'd been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah.
Okay, so she suffered. Oh, look, she had to go to AAA to be able to get her map to be able to go from Judah back to Moab, right? She suffered the ultimate loss. Her entire family is gone, and her sons are dead. There are no grandchildren. So she begins the return to her native land. In a metaphoric sense, to go back to Judah is to go to the land of the spirit. Yichud is, Judah is from, Yichud is unification. Sometimes in our times of loss, there's nothing else to do but go back to the state of the spirit. While on one hand, people are so culturally dislocated, the spiritual creativity that is fomenting underneath the surface in all kinds of communities is so unbelievable. We don't even know yet what it's all about. Like I talked to somebody recently, they're doing like, I'm doing 4 hours a day of learning Torah online by Zoom. It was an older woman. She was in her mid-70s. It used to be hard to get out in the morning, and I did not want to drive at night. But now I'm doing Torah all the time. So there's a lot of lousy stuff happening, but there's a lot of good stuff happening. And in this metaphor, what we see is that she's returning to the land of spirit. Anyone want to comment? I'm going to keep throwing pieces of Torah at you and invite you to comment and to reflect on them. Julie's sitting with a watch, so I have to talk fast.
Well, we can be here all night, I mean, but
You definitely can.
this is the kickoff for all night. Anyone wants to stay late, and yeah. But anyone that would like to say something, you can just unmute yourself, and if not, just sort of wave, or you can also kind of virtually wave if you want to figure out how to do that. Yeah.
Okay. So the question is not whether there's loss, because we know there's loss. Looking at the images, I see most of you have lived long enough to know that life doesn't always give you what you want. You thought you were going to get the perfect partner, you didn't. You thought you were going to get the perfect job, you didn't. You thought you were going to get the perfect kids, you didn't. You thought you were going to get the perfect body. You lived long enough to know. So the question is, how do you deal with that? Julie, you're my reader, so please.
Okay. Don't call me Naomi, which means pleasant, like Pleasantville. She told them, call me Mara, or Mara, which Mara means bitter, like the maror, because God has made my life very bitter. I went away full, but Adonai has brought me back empty. Why call me Naomi? Adonai has afflicted me. God has brought misfortune upon me.
Okay, so I want to ask you to comment on that. What do you make of that? Is she a far
Not happy.
She's not happy. Good.
She's not happy.
Is that the good news or the bad news?
I would say bad news, but you're going to tell me it's good news.
Well, what's the alternative to being unhappy? Look what happened. Of course she's unhappy.
Well,
There would be something wrong.
The alternative, you know what it was it Ordinary People. Do you remember that movie? Ordinary People?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. It was right. It was about loss. It was about a family that lost a child. That shouldn't happen here. And the husband was willing to call me Mara. I'm willing to sit in my grief. And the mother, it was an interesting role reversal, right? Was like, oh, let's get on. So what we have here, what we learn from Naomi, what we learn from her is sometimes the work of dealing with grief and loss is being willing to sit in the grief and the loss. In American culture, particularly, it's interesting. We don't know how old she is, but particularly with older widowed women, you know what the cultural prescription is? Prozac. They've been married 50 years. The husband dies. The kid wants the mother to start dating. The kids want the mother to start dating, and the psychiatrist wants to put her on Prozac. And I want to say, call her Mara. Let her sit in her bitterness. You remember during the time of I think it was Operation Desert Storm, there was an unwillingness to show the dead soldiers coming back home. I think we're this as a country, we're going to have to do some major collective bereavement. We're going to have to sit in our Mara for a little while. Yeah, please, Lori.
Could her bitterness be giving her resiliency for the journey that she's about to make with her daughter-in-laws? Okay,
so I'm going to I'll send you a Venmo payment for being the right exact point, because that's exactly where we're going. What we want to say is, what do we learn from her that will help her? Because very often when we allow people to have their time of being Mara, that gives them the resilience that they need. I think that in this period of time, sometimes people call, I'm doing online therapy these days, and sometimes people say, oh, it's a really bad week. And I said, what do you expect? You got 2 kids at home, you lost one of your incomes, you can't visit with your friends. So I say, my phrase these days is surf the pandemic wave. That's my equivalent. So yeah, so sometimes we have to be able to sit in that place of Mara. I see there's more than a full screen, so If I haven't said hello to everybody, I'm glad you're all here. Okay, I'm gonna keep going back and forth. Anyone else want to comment on Mara before we go back? Okay, so here I do the share, and here okay, so this is what we did before. So how have you dealt with losses in your life, or how are you dealing with them now? Are you giving yourself a hard time in moments when you feel like Mara, when you say, I should be Naomi? No, you know what? Today it's Monday morning. It's rainy. You know what? I don't have any appointments. Even if I wanted to get dressed up, I can't fit into those clothes anyways. So, today I'm going to take an extra 15 minutes and give myself some time. Julie, you look like you're thinking some deep thoughts.
Message. Judith Schmidt wants to share. Judith.
Oh,
Unmute yourself and say something. Yes.
Thank you, Rabbi Julie. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it's an apparent contradiction that that Naomi wants to be called Mara, and they're returning to the land of Judah, the land of spirit. But maybe Mara is the entryway.
Right, she hasn't left yet. That's right. This is preparatory for going the next step. Maybe she had to sit Shiva there for a little while before she could go on. Okay, so this is a long one. As long as you want to be my reader, I'm glad to be able to take a sip of water when you read.
Yeah, fine. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, "Return home, my daughters. I'm too old to have another husband. Even if there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and gave birth to sons, would you wait till they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? Because, by the way, in biblical law, it would be tradition to marry another brother in the family and continue the family name. But no, there is no one. No, my daughters, it is more bitter for me than for you, because Adonai's hand has gone out against me." At this, they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye. By the way, I read that Oprah Winfrey, her original name was Orpah, that she's named for this character. But Ruth clung to her. She cleaved to her. "Look," said Naomi, "your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her." But Ruth replied, "Don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you."
Wait. I just want to say, before you go,
okay.
It's easy to polarize and say one goes forward and one goes back. But in some ways, I maintain, if we do this allegorically, we have an Orpah and a Ruth in both inside of us. Sometimes when we're trying to go forward, a part of us says, "Nah, I want to stay in the same old ways." And the other part says, no, you can go forward. And then you wake up the next day and you do the same thing. And, you stay stuck in whatever is the habit or the addiction or whatever. So that's the nature of the human person, is that we have both. But what does she do? Go.
But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God.
You are mother, you are sister, you're most of all my friend. Where you lead me, I will follow until the very end.
That is the pièce de résistance in this book. That line where she says, "Where you go, I will go. Where you stay, I will stay. Your people are my people, and your God will be my God." In some sense, I want to say this. We've all had moments where we had to affirm our commitment to going forward in spite of the loss of the unknown. That is the equivalent of God's calling. Okay, I'll come back to this in a second, but I really want, this is an important piece. When we go to myth, okay, Moses is in the middle of the wilderness of his life. He's a fugitive, and he's called to go and redeem the people of Israel. You know what's the equivalent of the American myth? It's the Wizard of Oz. Dorothy is stuck in dusty old Kansas, and all of a sudden a tornado comes and sends her into the land of Oz, this colorful land, and she's on her way. For the Star Wars fans among you, Han Solo is in dusty old Tatooine, and all of a sudden a droid comes and calls him on his journey. My wife says that actually Hans, Luke Skywalker, and Princess Leia are the equivalent of Moses, Aaron, and Miriam. But that's another whole story. But in the myth, Jonah is called, in the mythic stories, we are called beyond our comfort zone to do something that's courageous. And I want to suggest that each of you in your life either have had those moments or are encountering those moments at this time. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to go and build a new pyramid. You don't have to go out, but there's something, it's an impulse to creativity. So maybe your calling is to clean up the garbage that's been the basement for 25 years. Maybe your calling is to reconnect with an old family member that you haven't talked to in a year and a half because you had a fight one night. I don't know what the calling is for each of you, but what Ruth begs of us to do is to see what are the ways in which we are being called in our own life. Anyone? Comments? Anyone want to share what your own experience of grief and loss has forced you to do to claim where you go, I will go, to answer your calling?
We did spend a couple of days cleaning our basement.
Well, there you go. Is that answering God's call?
It was answering something.
Yeah. You see,
Desire to not leave our kids with the job someday in the future.
Well, that's already, it's like, it's something from the future, an impulse calling you. When I see my clients, the host has stopped your sharing. Why have the host stopped my sharing? Did I just get bounced? Oh no.
You just stopped screen sharing. We can hear you.
Yeah, you're still here.
Okay, it just happened. It just happened, but that's okay. So sometimes when I see my clients and they call me, and I don't do a long conversation on the phone about tell me all your problems before I meet, but I want to know what's going on. What are you looking for? And I say to them the following: between now and the time I meet you, I want you to not think about all the problems that you want to share with me. I want you to think about, if you left my office on the last day, what would you have accomplished? So in a way, in our own healing, in dealing with loss, we want to be able to, what opportunities, what possibilities are being engendered by this time of loss for each of us. And I think that really is a very interesting question that your rabbi and a lot of her colleagues and a lot of my colleagues are asking. What is this going to mean for the future of the Jewish people? I don't know if next year, even if we could meet in public, we're going to be able to have these tikkunim without a Zoom session. Somebody said they did a Shiva minyan on Zoom, and there were people from all around the world. So why not, when you're going to have a Zoom session and a Shiva in the future, you also have a screen to invite people in from all the world. So I don't know what's being engendered, what's coming out of this time of Mara, this time of loss, but it might be interesting. I don't know. Comments before we go back? Julie, you're muted.
Right. Well, I had an odd thought, a very strange thought came in my mind the other day, and it was, what if a magic wand was waved and like tomorrow this was all suddenly over? would I be ready? Like, have I learned everything I need to learn? That was a crazy thought. I mean, I just meant me personally, not to mention society. It seems like we are learning some things, or a lot of us are learning a lot of values clarification. Suddenly it became very bold and stark, like what's really important. And being with other people, being with loved ones is so important. That, you know, experiences are more important than things, and people are more important than experiences. And then the idea of seeing who's essential. You know, the people that are the big shots aren't always so essential, and the people that are very humble are suddenly the people keeping us all going. And all the things that we knew, you know, a lot of things that we know kind of cerebrally, we're seeing them, and, you know, really very, very emotionally right now. So that's just like on societal level. But on me personally, like, what do I need to learn? And I do think about that. You know, I think it takes a while to see, and it might even be in retrospect, but certainly things are being learned.
And when people have individual losses, you know, like, I mean, people who have lost family members through COVID-19, it takes a while to harvest what their legacy was to you. It takes a while to be able to say, you know what, right now I'm missing them. Right now I'm still in shock, but I can begin to see what it's like now to be able to appreciate what it is that they left for me. Okay, we're moving forward. Okay, so before I go to the next text, some of this stuff that's coming up, I want to give you a heads up, is a little bit cryptic, and we're not going to address all of the issues, but I really want to stay with this allegory of what it is that comes out of Ruth and Naomi's encounter. So they go back. So Orpah stays. Orpah means the nape of the neck. Okay, and I actually, let me just go back and talk to you again. I missed something I wanted to say. The Zohar, the Kabbalah says that Naomi and Orpah, who are Moabite women, were daughters of the king of Moab. Okay, they were high class. You know, like Sarah. Sarah was a Chaldean princess, which made her a priestess, which actually is a good argument for reclaiming the Jewish princess. But that's a different topic of conversation. But they were wise women that the Zohar teaches us, and so they have a certain amount of kind of spiritual wisdom. So okay, so Ruth goes forward, and Naomi and Orpah goes back home. So let's go back to, okay, now they've taken their GPS and they got themselves back from Moab to Judah. This is what happens next. We're in chapter 2 only.
It's only 4 chapters, right? It's a very short book.
A short book.
Now Naomi had a relative on her husband's side from the clan of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." So she went out and began to glean in the fields behind the harvesters, working in a field belonging to Boaz from the clan of Elimelech.
Okay, so after I quit, it takes me a while to get back to where I see you all. Okay, so what it is that it says in our tradition, in Jewish tradition, that you'll take care of the poor, the widow, and the orphan. And one of the ways in which biblical culture had a social, what we would call social service network, is that when they harvested the fields, they would leave the edges of the fields open in order for the poor, the widow, and the orphan to be able to glean from the fields. So in this case, Naomi, right, Ruth's mother-in-law, says, you know what? My husband had a cousin who lived in Westchester County. No, wait. My husband had a cousin who is named Boaz, and you can go and you can glean from the fields. Now remember, women in this culture without a husband did not have any social status. I mean, that's really whatever modern feminist understanding we want to bring to this story, they didn't have any social status. And so going to be able to glean in the fields was their what was their social network, if you will. Anyone, comments, questions? Okay, meanwhile, back at Ruth and Naomi, it's getting interesting. This woman is going out into the field on her own. What's going to happen to her? Okay, let's do the next one. Go. So Boaz, are you there?
So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting. I've told the men not to touch you." So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Okay. So
It looks
go.
like she had a very dewy complexion despite all that work in the fields, at least in the imagination of some European artists.
Well, it's interesting, I had to go to Reb Google to look for some of these images, and there's actually a lot on the Ruth story. Here's the piece in the Mythic Journey. There was a guy by the name of Joseph Campbell who wrote a book called The Hero with 1,000 Faces, and he looked at myths all across culturally, and it's like this. When people go on a journey, invariably, allies show up along the journey. When Dorothy is on her way to Oz, she meets the lion, the Tin Woodman, and the Scarecrow. Moses has Miriam and Aaron to help her. Luke Skywalker has Han Solo and Princess Leia. But that's not the issue. Okay, so I'm suggesting that Boaz is one of the allies that is taking Ruth along the journey to the fulfillment of her own destiny. But the question that I want to ask you is, who have been the allies or the angels in your life that have pointed you in the right direction? Let me give you another piece of Torah around that. You remember in the Joseph story, Joseph's brothers have gone out into the field. Joseph has his coat of many colors, and he comes to a man in Shechem, and he says, "Hey, have you seen my brothers? There's a pack of 11 boys. Have you seen them?" And what does the guy say? Yeah, right. That's right. He says, "Go this way. Go that way." And so what happens? His brothers find him. They throw him into the pit. They think they're killing him. The Ishmaelites pick him up. They bring him down to Egypt. He gets in jail in Egypt. He gets freed in jail. And then he gets a job as CEO of Pyramids.com. Okay, so the circuitous route of his destiny was influenced by some kind of angelic presence along the way. And I bet for each of you, there's been somebody somewhere, whether it was the person who introduced you to your spouse, or the person who introduced you, who bought you who helped buy you your house, or whether it was the person who said, no, don't go to law school, go to medical school. Invariably, there have been angels along the way, and they may still show up these days. I wonder if anybody has a story they want to share. You do, but you don't want to share it. I know.
I would share with you a story of this is actually my mom's story, if that's okay. Because she had a very striking story like that. My mom was widowed at a very young age, in her 40s. Both my parents were 46. My father was killed in an accident. And my mom, after having a very difficult time and being very mara, but she also became very spiritual. And in fact, we're currently self-publishing her memoir. That's a project happening right now, God willing. So anyway, when she was trying to cope with everything, it was Sukkot, and she went to the sukkah at Chabad House in Austin. We lived in San Antonio. I was away in Israel. And my mom went to this sukkah, and she was sitting there, and a young man said, Mrs. Hilton, like he recognized her. Somehow they knew each other, and he had become kind of religious and had on a kippah and all this. And they started talking, and he said that he had studied at this place called Pardes Institute in Jerusalem. And he just put it in her mind that maybe that's a place she could go study. And when she was on a trip to Israel, she visited there and saw that they had this poster on the wall that was the only place she'd ever seen that poster was with the quote, "In wilderness is the preservation of the world." I think that's Thoreau or I think, or Emerson. And we had that same poster at our ranch in Texas. So she, at any rate, because of meeting this young man, she ended up changing her life. She went to Jerusalem. She took my youngest sister with her. She studied for a year. And she said it didn't like suddenly make everything better, but it really set her life on a different path to where years later she became a chaplain, a hospital chaplain, and she became very, very spiritual. So just that person that she met who planted this idea and told her about this place that she could go was like her guardian angel, or her, someone who
and generational, because it must have influenced you along the way.
Right. The same thing with like the guy that gave directions to Joseph. I always said if he hadn't given directions, world history would have been completely different, right? Just by the simple act of him giving him directions. So, I mean, I'm sure for myself, there were people who pointed me, like Mordecai Liebling, who was the head of the Reconstructionist movement, pointed me in the direction actually of studying in the Aleph Rabbinic program. And that was, and my mother too also pointed me. So there are people that nudged me in my directions, and I'm sure other people could think of it.
You've done it for other people too.
I had a thought, maybe.
Go on.
Well, maybe people feel a little shy about saying it on screen, but maybe you want to write in the chat, just then somebody, like in one sentence, if you're up for it, you can write in the chat the name of somebody who influenced you, if you don't want to like be in the spotlight and say it in front of everybody. It would be interesting to see if other people had experiences like that.
I had David Zeller, who was a Shlomo Chassid, a rabbi. I met him at a yoga retreat, and he said, "Oh, come and study transpersonal psychology in California with me," and that led to a whole way of training that ended up me writing my book on Jewish views of the afterlife through the school I attended in California, because I couldn't have written on life after death in a psychology program anywhere else than had I not gone than in California. So we all have these stories, and what I want to say is Ruth's story is our story in some ways. Yeah, someone want to say?
Raised your hand there. Lisa.
Lenora. It's Lenora.
Lenora. It says Lisa, but it's actually Lenora.
Yeah.
So
I'm in the dark, so I didn't put my face on screen. I look crazy. So I don't know for me if it's ever been like a person, but it's been like there's been two paths set in front of me, and either I choose one way or another, not necessarily knowing which way either one is going to take me. And I think, I don't know if it's luck or fate or whatever, but I always feel like it always works. The way I pick at least always seems to be the better outcome. But that means that could just be because I don't know what the other one would have led me to.
No, that's beautiful. And it fits in with the Ruth story because, Ruth is on some kind of path. And even though God's name does not appear frequently in the text, we haven't read so much about the God story other than they're saying, God sort of abandoned me, but there's still a sense of divine providence in Ruth's life. And what you're saying is all of those moments where I wasn't sure which way to go, there was some invisible divine providence sending me on the right choice. And sometimes we only get that when we look back in retrospect. Sometimes it's not obvious that, we cultivate trust by going through experiences that sort of point us in the right direction.
Agreed.
Okay, so I want to make sure that I land before the ice cream melts. So, well, let me just see. Okay, so there's a little bit more on Boaz that we're going. It's actually a pretty cryptic story. It gets a little racy here. Okay, so this is more of the same. Let's read this. We won't spend a lot with this one. I want to get to the X-rated part.
Okay. At this, she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Boaz replied, "I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband, how you left your father and mother in your homeland and came to live with a people you did not know before." So Ruth stayed close to the servant girls of Boaz to glean until the barley and the wheat harvest were finished, and she lived with her mother-in-law.
Okay, here's the thing you need to know. In this culture, a widowed woman whose husband has died, she has to marry her husband's brother or has to be redeemed by some family member. It's archaic family law from the land of Judah, circa 5th century BCE. We don't go by that one today, but at least understand that's what's going on in this story here. But I want to do a little reflection here. Who have been the allies and benefactors helping you move from famine to sustenance? And who have been the angels and guides pointing the way for you? Just like Boaz does that for Ruth. And like that man sent your mother to Pardes, or the guy who sent me to California did that for me. Okay, now, make sure the kids are in bed, please. Go.
One day, Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you are there till he's finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he's lying, then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do." "I'll do whatever you say," Ruth answered. So she went down to the threshing floor and did everything her mother-in-law told her to do.
Okay, listen, for those of you who are newly married or long married, you know that not everything your mother-in-law says is right. But in this case, in this story, you know, my heading on here is called "Following Your Destiny," and that's really where we're going as this book begins to come in for a landing. You know, so that Naomi's very aware of Ruth's vulnerability as a single woman, and she takes steps to protect her. So not only is Boaz an ally and a kind of a guardian angel for her, but so is Naomi. Naomi gives Ruth the plans to prepare herself for the encounter. And, you know, there's much to be said about gender dynamics in here. And actually contemporary feminist Jewish writings see Naomi and Ruth as having a lesbian relationship. You can get somebody to do that another year. But in the time I have, I'm not going to explore these dynamics. But for now, when Ruth says, "All that you will say to me, I will do," she's using a language that parallels the experience at Sinai when the Israelites say, when they receive the Torah, they say, "Na'aseh v'nishma," all that God has done, we will do. So Naomi is a guide bringing forth the soul and its destiny. Want to just pause for a moment and see if anybody wants to comment before we. I told you I'd get you to the crescendo before the ice cream melted. Yeah, Rabbi Julie, were you just waving, or you want to comment? You're muted. Go.
Lori, were you raising your hand there? You can just speak up.
Yeah, there was something that like kind of struck me, not so much about the Ruth going down to the threshing floor, but this question of who are your angels, or who's guiding you. And actually, I guess it could be applied to Naomi too, is, are you listening? are you open to those angels, or you're those people who are guiding you? Because I think sometimes that's even harder. That's more challenging than actually. It's more challenging to listen, I think, and to allow others to guide you. So that struck me. It's like you asked, who were the angels who guided you, or I forget exactly what the question was, but have you been open to allowing others to guide you, or to suggestion?
So there was a comment Hasidic Rebbe made about Shavuot and the giving of the Torah. He says, why do we call it the giving of the Torah rather than the receiving of the Torah? Because that's what you're saying, are you receiving guidance? And so he said, I don't know whether it's the Kotzker Rebbe, I don't remember which Rebbe, he said, Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah, happened at Mount Sinai, but the receiving of the Torah happens every single day. So the challenge for us at this time of year and at this time of our lives and this time of our cultural development is to create the receptivity to be open to hearing whatever that guidance is, whatever it's calling us. And sometimes we get stuck in the Mara place. Earlier I was saying the Mara place we need to do, but sometimes we get stuck in the poor me, I'm all alone, there's nobody here, nobody's calling me, I can't, we start to feel sorry for ourselves. And then we close down to whatever blessing and to whatever angelic presences there are. So this year, in order to receive the Torah, in order to hear the guidance, you want to be able to be like Ruth and honor the loss, but also stay open to whatever is the next gift, whatever is the next blessing in your life. Anyone else?
I want to say we have some people that put some very interesting things in the chat, or at least we have one person. Michael put something in the chat about. Would you share that, Michael?
Yes, I think I've told the story before. Some people may have heard it. At a time when I was despondent and looking for some sort of a connection, I went to synagogue on the high holidays, and I hadn't been in 20 years, and I had never been to a regular Shabbat service at that point in my life.
Huh.
And I went to Bet
Rabbis don't take confession, by the way, just so you know.
I went to, I lived down the block from Bet Torah at the time, and the first person, I walked up to the door, and the first person said, "Do you have tickets?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Well, then you can't come in." And I walked away, and Mitch Mahler, of blessed memory, beckoned me over. He said, come here. That's here. Take my ticket. Go in. See me after the holiday.
Yeah.
I went in for Rosh Hashanah. I went in for the following Shabbat. And I knew barely the alphabet at the time and learned the service from going. And it's all because Mitch wouldn't see me turn away.
Yeah. And I want to bless you, and I want to bless all of us that we stay open to whoever is the next incarnation of that. Like you live longer and you look back and you say, oh, you know what, that happened in my 20s, that happened in my 30s. But as you get older, there's also changes going on for the next chapter of our lives. And so I want to bless you that you stay open to be able to hear those messages. And sometimes they come in the form of a person, but sometimes they come in the form of a book that falls off the shelf. Sometimes they come in the form of an email that happens to show up and sends you on the journey. I remember once I was reading a story about the work of Jean Houston, who does sort of mythic work. And she talked about this workshop process she did called Mystery School. And I read the book, I stayed up all night, and then I went to get my mail the next morning, and there was a brochure inviting me to participate in Mystery School. You know, so sometimes the angels along the journey show up in very uncanny kinds of ways. Okay, so
and
we're
sometimes it's a teacher who's speaking directly to your experiences at this moment and highlighting them in a way that you didn't see before. So
right.
Thank you.
Right. And then. Okay, so then, okay, so this is the pièce de résistance. Rabbi Julie, please.
Okay, so Boaz took Ruth after this little encounter on the threshing floor, and I'd encourage people to go read the whole book. It's not very long, and you can find it online on Sefaria or just, you know, many places. And Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. Then he went to her. We know what that means. And Adonai enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to a son. This then is the family line of Peretz.
Wait, actually, no, read the one on the left, because
the women said to Naomi, "Praise be to Adonai, who is this day has not left you without a kinsman redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given birth." Then Naomi took the child, laid him in her lap, and cared for him. The women living there said, "Naomi has a son," and they named him Obed. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. That is.
Okay, let's do this. We'll jam. I'll read one line, you read one line. So this then is the line of Perez.
Perez was the father of Hezron.
And Hezron was the father of Ram.
Ram, the father of Aminadab.
Aminadab, the father of Nachshon.
Nachshon, the father of Salmon.
Salmon, the father of Boaz.
Boaz, the father of Obed.
Obed, the father of Jesse, and together.
And Jesse, the father
of David. Okay. All this is a genealogy. It's like, why? Well, what does that have to do with anything? So, what's that all about? That's I'm telling you, that's the pièce de résistance, the story. But what's that have to do with anything? Okay, who remembers the words to Eliyahu Hanavi? Sing it. Go. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Hatishbi, Bimei Rabbi Hu Yavo Elenu. What's next?
Mashiach ben David.
And then in our house we say, Mashiach bat Ruth.
Okay. Good. Okay.
From the Ruth Boaz connection comes the lineage that gives birth to King David, and from the lineage of King David, our tradition holds, will come the Mashiach. In other words, that juicy night on the threshing floor was world transforming, because it led to a birth that 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 led to the lineage that will transform the planet. And when we are following our destiny, whether in ways large or small, each of us are vehicles of world transformation. They say you lose a soul, you lose the world. So each of us have some, well, it doesn't matter, a destiny large or small. There's something that you're here to do. There's something, whether it's to love, whether it's to clean the junk in the basement, whether it's to become a rabbi, whether it's to write a book, whether it's to publish your mother's memoir, whatever it is, each of us are being called, and especially in this new world that we're waiting is going to happen. I think we all have a different kind of role to play. So here was this poor widowed Moabite immigrant who didn't know which way was up and which way was down, who took the time to be receptive, to hear her own calling, to wait, to open up to the angels and the guidance, who then became a catalyst for the transformation of the world. And so we're on Shavuot, we want to open up to whatever is the revelation that will help each of us be catalysts for being participants in the transformation of the world.
Thank you.
Amen.
Yasher Koach.
A couple of more comments, and then we're going to end with a Kaddish.
Okay.
Anyone?
Did you see what I posted?
Then why don't you
I'm-
read that first, John? Read what you posted.
As Yogi Berra said, when you come to a fork in the road, take it. And so must we make our own way and follow our own path. The choice we make is our destiny. The walk is ours to tread. From Boaz to David and beyond, we journey.
Amen, 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 amen. So,
Well,
thank.
I have a question, if it's okay to.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not.
Well, you know, this is the way I've often felt. A lot of the things you described of life as a spiritual journey, and I guess getting into a time like now with so many people suffering, it almost feels like, do I dare to think about my spiritual journey, fulfillment, creativity, development, when, like, do you know what I'm saying? There's a sort of a deep sadness everywhere and a lot of anxiety and loss. And how does that, I mean, in a nutshell, and 1 foot, Reb Simcha, like, how is it okay to even be thinking about one's spiritual life under these circumstances?
You know, how many of you find you go through a lot of different moods, right? And that's in a 2-hour period. That's in a 1-hour period, right? So what it is we're being forced to live multimodality lives. In some moments, we need to feel the mara. We need to feel the grief. In other moments, we feel the dislocation. And you know, we're Ruth and Naomi and Orpah on the road, and we don't know whether to go to Moab or we stay in Moab, or whether to go back to Judah. In other moments, we're Naomi on the threshing floor giving birth to something else. So I want to go back to my screen share for a minute. Hang on, well, it doesn't matter. I'll figure it out in a second. See, I think the question that we want to ask here is, where is it? Come on, you can do it. What's the new life being called into birth? You see, there is death, but there is rebirth also. It is happening. So we don't want to become calloused. We don't only want to be thinking about ourselves or the next incarnation or whatever it is, but we want to both console the bereaved, deal with the reality of current time, and be preparing for the future. It's a very, very difficult time in some regards, but I think that we need to be, yeah, in some moments we need to be doing. If we get stuck in any one of those modes, we're in trouble. I think it's being able to move through those different kinds of modalities. Okay, so I want to say that this has been a wonderful opportunity to share Torah with you. And we have 2 dates in June. One will be doing Jewish views of the afterlife in biblical and rabbinic tradition, and the other will be afterlife in Kabbalistic tradition. Somewhat of a reprise on what I did. It was a good number of years ago. If you look up Da'at Institute, DAAT Institute.net, and you want to send me your email address, I will keep you informed of other things I'm doing. And again, I thank you.
Kaddish. Kaddish.
Yeah. I'm gonna say the Kaddish in a minute. I don't know if you're all aware of this, but you have a wonderful, wonderful rabbi, and so you're all blessed in that way. So thank you all.
Thank you so much, Simcha, for
do you want to say something about who you in particular are saying Kaddish for?
Well, this is on Shavuot. Both of my Mahatunim, my husband's mother passed away on Shavuot, and then 3 years later, his father passed away on Shavuot. So this is their yortzeit. So I'm going to say Kaddish for them. And anyone else who wants to say Kaddish, please unmute yourself if you're saying Kaddish. We have some people here who are bereaved, and I would like to acknowledge that our member, Judy, who's here, has both of her parents have recently passed away during this pandemic, and she might want to say the Kaddish with us, or anyone who's saying Kaddish tonight. And so let's please join me.
Symbolic posture. I'm kneeling. I'm putting one knee on the ground to say Kaddish, because if I stand, I won't be able to be in the screen.
Yitgadal v'yitgadash shemei Rabbah, ve'alma divdat yirutei v'yalit malchutei, v'chayechon v'yomechon v'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, v'agala v'zman kariv imru amen.
Amen.
Yehei shmei Rabbah mevorach le'olam u'mei omaya.
Olam u'mei omaya.
Yitbarach, yitbarach, yitpa'ah, yitzomam v'yitnaseh, Yitadal, Yitaleh, Shmei Kutcha,
Richu.
Birchata v'shirata, Tishbechata v'nechmata,
Amen.
Amen. So may we all
Amen.
be interwoven in the fabric of life, and may we be agents of bringing more love and transformation.
And I think we need to say, Yehi Shalom Rabba Min Shemayim V'chaim Aleinu V'Koyso V'imru Amen. Osei Shalom B'imromav Hu Yasei Shalom Aleinu.
Amen.
Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. That got cut off from my text.
Amen.
Okay. On that note, thank you all very much, and
yeah,
good Yontif.
And
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for everyone to join us tonight. Thank you. Thank you, Simcha. And why don't you all unmute yourself before you go? Just unmute yourself and say Chag Sameach, and maybe we'll see some of you on our Saturday.
Chag Sameach.
Chag
Enjoy the ice cream.
Oh, good to see everyone showing your face.
Thank you. Chag Sameach.
Abby.
Yeah, that ice cream is really good. That is really good. Very good. But whatever you did, my blintzes. Yeah.
Right.
Thanks so much.
Chag Sameach, everyone.
We'll be seeing Cantor Rabbis there. She just left, so you'll see her on Saturday singing beautifully and everything. Okay. Hi, Judith. I'm meaning to call you back again. Well, okay, but she's gone. Okay, guys. Okay.
Chag Sameach, Rabbi.
Chag Sameach. Okay. Well, I don't. Maybe. Okay. Bye bye. Bye, John. Bye bye.